this talk has a lot to do with ideas, so it's not so much a portfolio of things that I've shot, but if you'd like to see it, this is the easiest place to see it. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, I don't often do this, but I thought since a lot of you are in the portfolio development program, instead of having to take notes the entire time, just send me an email. I'll send you a PDF of the whole talk. You can take iPhone shots during if there are screen captures that you like, I don't mind. But when it's done, the whole thing's yours so you can have a copy for yourself. A disclaimer about this talk. Some of the other talks are much more art and information related. They're things that I teach. This talk is entirely opinion. These are just based on the experiences that I've had developing as a photographer. So there is really not a right and a wrong answer to this process. You're going to take some combination of experience, curiosity, and common sense and put those together to continue developing your work. So this is just the way that I've done it. I hope you find some of these things useful, but just because I did it one way doesn't mean you can't do it completely the opposite direction.
Thank you.
The other part I just wanted to mention really quickly is, this is not a joke, this is serious. If you have professional questions, legal questions, tax, accounting questions, ask a legal question to a lawyer. Ask an accounting question to an accountant. Ask photography questions to photographers. Do not take legal advice from photographers. It's a bad idea. You don't take auto body advice from a dentist. The same thing applies here. If you have really specific questions that are legal in nature, that are accounting in nature, I am neither of those. I have both a lawyer who I ask or an accountant who I ask. So just kind of keep in your head to try to go to the right person for the information you're looking. Now, today's layout is going to be a little different. Usually B&H says, Adam, could you talk for an hour and a half, and then we'll have 30 minutes of questions at the end. This, I'm going to get it all into an hour, and we're going to devote an hour to questions. So we'll give a little pause after an hour. If anyone has to step out, they can step out. At the end of 2 hours after the live questions, some which were submitted, others will come from you guys. We'll pause again. I'm happy to stay a little afterwards if there are other things that you didn't have time to ask, were too shy, any configuration of they didn't get answered. I'm here to answer the questions to the best of my ability today. So that's the layout. These are three things that when I started professionally in photography, I didn't believe. And I find a lot of my photo students will struggle with some of these concepts. So the first one, photography is not a zero-sum game. If all of you sell out all of your work, it doesn't take any amount of work away from someone else. That's what I mean by that. There is enough room in the market for everyone to sell stuff and everyone to do well without cannibalizing somebody else. So as you have portfolio classes with one another, you have group shows with people, you have solo shows. I found I've gotten more work giving work to other photographers who I was working alongside of than having some sort of adversarial relationship where it's sort of, this is my part of the show, like don't come here, I want this to be just so. It's totally fine. There is enough in the market for everyone, and it's a growing market both nationally and internationally. The second idea, you have more than one chance to get things right. You might only have one chance to email one editor. Maybe you can't send 5 emails to the same person. You will exhaust them. But the idea that some people have that I've only got one shot to do this, and if I blow it, I'm done, is not true at all. I'm a testament to that because you will hear 55 more minutes of mistakes that I have encountered and I've made, and I'm still in the market. It's fine. It's part of the process. And everyone in the photo world knows that people, as they're growing up in photo, regardless of age, are going to make mistakes. So it's perfectly fine. The last one is, the photo world, as far as I've seen it, is not American Idol. This is not how the photo world works. I don't think someone plucks you up and says, like, you're going to be great, and now everything's taken care of. don't sit around and wait to be discovered, but also manage the expectation that this isn't really how this world works. I know very few friends, very few colleagues who've had one person say, like, now you're it, and it went from there. It just doesn't seem to work that way, so try not to try not to burden yourself with the idea that you're waiting for something like that to be discovered. At the outset of this, I know some of you are in the portfolio class, so I wanted to just generally frame a question that everyone who transitions from doing single photos and series into projects asks, which is, do I have a project yet, or do I just have a bunch of pictures? So my very simple way of looking at whether I have a project is, do I have an idea that is too big to fit into a single photograph? If the answer is yes, I have the start of a project. That, to me, is where it lies. Some pictures, all in one, it's just one photo. It's not a project. But when you have an idea that has enough mass to it that you can't fit it in a single photograph, to me, that's a point where I start to think, like, yeah, maybe this is like a project. Maybe this is something that I'm going to turn into something more. So we will start this with, I'm going to give you a project format. There's probably I haven't like researched whether other people do this. There is probably other configurations of people who have a similar approach. This is just an approach that worked for me. So we're going to look at two projects that I did. One, which was very fun. It was a colossal failure in so many regards. And I'll get into the details of that. And then I'll have another one which was much more successful because I took a very different approach to what I did the first time. So the first project that I want to talk about was I went to a place called Tanna, Vanuatu. I put a map on the left because most people don't really know where it is. It's about 4.5 hours off the coast of Australia. And I was sent out there by a foundation in New York to do like a kind of a documentary project that they just said, can you give us a who's who of what goes on out there so that people who don't know the island can get some sense of it. And I had a little bit of information that they briefed me with up front, but I essentially turned over the programming to them. They gave me something to do, and I went out and did it. It was a bit of a documentary, day in the life kind of thing, but it was vague, and the vagueness was a long-term problem for it. So I went out there, and one of the things that I didn't discover until my very last night, so this was 8 months in planning, 3 weeks out, on the island. And the very last night, I sat with this guy, the guy in the red shirt, a guy named Tom Capullo. And Tom was my host. And I had heard that the London School of Economics does a survey of the happiest places on the planet. And countries like Bhutan and Denmark land very high on the list. Vanuatu was top of the list either 2010 or 2011. And as a New Yorker living on a very different island, I didn't really know what that meant. When somebody said to me, that's the happiest place on the planet, I didn't know if I was going to turn up and people were just going to be like skipping around. Like, I don't know what that really looks like. And it looked like, you know, guys hanging out and people in the village doing their thing. There wasn't anything particularly on the surface and nothing that made it into the pictures that revealed to me that this is in fact the happiest place on the planet, at least that year. And the last night, I sat down with Tom, and we were having a conversation, and I asked him, Tom, is there anything off-island that you would like? I mean, if you could go to Australia, New Zealand, fly over to Europe, Asia, like, is there anything that you don't have here that you would like? And he paused, and he thought, for what felt like an eternity. It was probably like a minute of silence. And you could just see like the mental Rolodex going, like he's just flicking through everything in his head. And he got to the end of it and he said, you know, I've got the house in the village, the bungalows on the beach where I was staying. He's got Margaret, who's his wife. Kids are healthy. His brother Lava, who's named after the volcano on the island, I love that, has a car. He goes, no, I'm good. couldn't believe it. For all the places I've traveled to in the world, I have never met a person who, when I asked them, is there anything that you want? Nothing. They're good. Now, that moment, which was really profound in the project, showed up in about that many of the pictures. I completely missed it. And I look at the whole project now as an extended scouting trip. Now I would go back and shoot it completely differently. But by not having much of a plan for it, the project didn't come together well. I had a writer from the New York Times who was going to do a piece on it. The founder and the director of the project got into a dispute. He said, they're fighting. I can't put an article in the Times. These guys are like in an argument. So press, gone. None of that. Submitted my final pictures to the director. That thing was going to go to another non-for-profit for grant funding. Never got paid. So like 12 grand in the hole, zero on that. So we're 0, 0. Additional things. You think, oh, maybe you can get some other things out of it, other, press, maybe print sales. Nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. It was a really cool experience. 8 months in planning, 3 weeks in execution, and the whole thing amounted to a really good story for pictures that I have nothing to reflect it. So that was a way to not do a project. I don't advise just doing a day in the life documentary, no planning, no real strategy, and letting someone who's hiring you give you the framework for which you are to operate under. It was not a good configuration. So when I had a chance to do a second project in Japan, I took a really different approach. And the first step was a friend had introduced me to the Japanese National Tourism Organization, JNTO. And they said, why don't you tell them about your project? You want to go photograph master craftsmen in Japan? They've got some cultural stuff going on. Why don't you see if that's something that they'd be interested in? And I went and I pitched the project in a really raw form to them. And I said, this is what I'd like to do. Here are the areas that I'd like to go to. I have these people that I'd like to visit, people who I've researched, people who I've met. So there's some framework to this. And I'd like to really look at two main questions. How people pass information from one generation to the next, and how do craftsmen make something that lasts? How do you make something that's going to last 1,000 years? And the JNTO said, actually, we have like a journalism budget. We have some money we could actually put to this. So if you want to go out there for close to 3 weeks, if you fly yourself there, we can pay for everything on the ground. And I was like, really? Like, I'm going to be able to go. You guys are going to help me out. And they said, yeah, we'll do some introduction letters to some other people that you haven't met. And with that, I said, okay, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to do a project in a different way than I had done previously, because I didn't want to do that Tana version again. So I'm a little analog in some things. I got out a notebook and a pen, and I started listing out things that I wanted to do. And I came up with a framework, which hopefully is useful for you. I use it on every single project that I did from this point forward. And since you probably can't read my writing, I typed it larger. I have 3 columns. This is how I break up every single project that I do. The only exception might be a commercial project where someone is saying, can you take a picture of these cars? Okay, fine, I'll take a picture of your cars. But for projects, for things you want to develop, 3 columns: inspiration, observation, and conclusion. And I'll explain what each of these mean so that hopefully they are useful to you. So, inspiration. I ask myself, why am I doing this? What got me here? What are the things that I've read, I've seen? Where does the curiosity come from? What are the things that are driving me? And you ask, what are the things that are driving you to take time from your life to do this? You'd like to understand what your driving forces are, because the project will emerge out of that. For me, a big portion of it was I finished art school, spent a lot of time in high-end construction in New York. The world of building was a world that I was fascinated by, but I wanted to see it on a much more ancient and still practiced end. And Japan was the place that I was really interested in. The other bit was I spent some time in and out of a Zen monastery, and that is a philosophical place, for lack of a better word. Not like a pretentious thing, but it's just like, it's a place where you think about stuff. And if you're a Zen Buddhist, you try and think about nothing. So anyway, between the two, this intersection not only kind of reveals the motivation of the project, but it actually, in its end product, it informed the shape of some of the exhibition prints. It is this sort of two splicing circles that ended up, these are the panels that I made for a portion of the exhibition, came out of this idea. So inspiration first. This is easy enough for you to list before you go out and do anything. Observation. What I mean by this is, these are the things that after you go and shoot something, after you go and meet a guy like Tom, for example, and you have a living experience because you had a camera in hand and you were in front of something, that experience is gonna change you. There's some things that you will encounter that you couldn't have envisioned had you just sat at home and thought about it. These are observations. These are all of the things that after you shoot it, you say like, all right, like this is kind of like what I learned. This is what I saw. This is what the world revealed to me when I had a camera. And these are the things that I find interesting. And you'll find that there is usually a relationship between the things that inspired you to go, or motivated you, if you don't like the word inspiration, and the things that you observed. You will find things, and they tend to be, I find, even without any filter, they tend to be pretty interesting. So they're unexpected things. I went to visit, this is rope makers. They make ceremonial rope for the Shinto shrines in Maizuru, which is in northwestern Japan. They do it as a blessing for the fishermen so that they go out to sea and come back. Now, after they made the ropes, I did not expect them to take all of the extra material and set it on fire. And that's what they did. All of a sudden, there was a fire burning behind me. And I turned around, and one of the prominent pieces of imagery that you find in Zen Buddhism is a circle. And I thought, wow, it's just amazing how the idea and the image like connected, like one to one. The thing burned up behind me. I got 2 shots, and then the whole circle was gone. It was just a big heap of burning fire. I couldn't have known that something like that was going to happen just thinking about or researching a project. I actually have to go and do that. So these are the observations. The conclusions, this is where I find a lot of students who I work with, they don't really get to. And the conclusion, in plain terms, is so what? Why should someone really care about what I shot? I had a fun time. It was, it was a cool experience. Met some interesting people, saw some stuff I didn't see before. But maybe somebody in Japan would look at it and be like, that's really ordinary. Like, I see that every single day. Why should they care? And I think that portion of a project is the part that I see developed the least from most people. They get to like, I got to a place, I shot this, how cool is this? It had an impact on me, and it just kind of stops. It like loses its momentum. The so what question is the question that editors will ask. It's what gallerists ask. There are lots of people making pictures. So what? What are you doing? Is it really that interesting? And there are more pictures that I take that I look at and I say, so what? And there's nothing there. So it's a cool picture, it's an interesting place, but it's not a project. It doesn't develop an idea further. It doesn't reveal an insight or a point of view that I feel is unique enough. So it's a pass. But you will, by engaging the question, you are bound to come to some interesting answers. And that's really where the point of view emerges in a project. Now, the sum total of this project went a lot differently. There were exhibitions, art fairs, sold prints, interviews online and print. Now, this is not like a look at how much I accomplished. This is, when I did it one way, nothing happened. And when I came up with a plan, a bunch of things happened. So for me, at least, this was a better solution. And it was something that I've adopted now to use on every project going forward. And I have a lot of students who are like, well, why do you take a certain approach with it? And I said, well, because one, when I look at it, there was 0 yield. And the other one yielded a bunch of things that I had anticipated, some things I hoped for, and some other stuff that I didn't even think was possible. So, being invited, this was a book that some of the craftsmen in Kyoto made. I wasn't thinking when I set out to do this that I was going to get invited to be in somebody else's book. That was really for me, that was almost more flattering because a lot of the craftsmen would say that journalists come and photograph us, they ask us the same questions, and they ask us to do the same things over and over again. We started to become friends because our engagement was more as a maker-maker, and we had fun together. And every time I go back to Japan, I'm going back in November, we see each other. Like we found a common ground to which we operate under. And when they had invited me to be in their book, I thought, like, that's something I had not expected at all. But had I not gone through my own, boring listing exercise, I probably wouldn't have gotten that far along. So that is the general framework that I use for projects. That's the longest portion of this. I'm just going to keep an eye on the time as we go through this. These are like silly questions that I had, mostly that I didn't get right. I used to do in sort of a way that I don't do anymore, that I'm just going to go through. So people will often ask, how many pictures do I need for these things? I want to submit to a website. I want to submit to a magazine. How many pictures do I need? I want to do an exhibition, group exhibition, solo exhibition. How many pictures do I need? I want to do a book. Do I have enough pictures for a book? This is a general framework that I find is more or less consensus in a chunk of the photo world. There are exceptions. You can buy a book that has 2 photographs in it and it's some weird avant-garde exercise and you open it, there's 2 pages and that's the whole thing. I get it. And then there's huge retrospectives of somebody who's been shooting for, they've been shooting for 40 years. It's a 400-page book. There are also those. But in general, if you submit to an online publication, to a print magazine, I find most of my emails have 10 to 12 photos in them. They usually whittle it down to like 4 to 8, but they like to have some choice. So that's generally what I prepare. For an exhibition, solo exhibition, some of you guys, as you're doing the group exhibition, the request was to submit 3, one's going to get selected. Anyone who's giving you real estate on their wall wants to have a choice in the matter. So you give them options. But if they want 3, you don't send them 30. There's a reasonable range that you'd like to have in your head so that when you're working with them, you're not creating any more work for them. When you get to a book, I'm working on a book of the Japanese work right now. The curator who's helped me on it, as I've gone through some of the early phases of development, she was like, get 100 pictures. You want like at least 100 pictures. Because the book designer is going to take some in, put some out. I'm going to have a hand in how this goes. And like an average book is going to be like yay big. It's not going to be this big and it's not going to be that big. It's going to be somewhere in like 100 pieces of paper, which when you start getting into printing costs, these numbers become very real for printers. So on the front end, you'd like to just have, I find it useful. Maybe you don't want to have, I find it useful to have these ranges of like, all right, it's at exhibition scale, or like it's at book scale. So those are the numbers that I use just as a simple idea. Initially, the question I would ask myself, where do I publish? I found I was asking the wrong question. The question should be, who is interested in your work? There was a woman at the end of the last B&H talk who, she came up and she said, I like to photograph flowers. This is what I do. I photograph flowers, but I don't know what to do with it. And the weekend prior, I read an article on a floral designer who was talking about bad pictures. And I asked her, I said, have you ever sent your work to a floral designer? And she said, no, I never really thought about that. That's a really good idea. And it was something that, my feeling is that if you ask the right question, you'll come up with an answer on your own. You don't need someone to tell you who's interested in your work. You look at the type of work that you produce, and you ask yourself, who's into this? Who is going to have some interest in it? Once you figure out where the interest is, the publication outlets lay themselves out really easily. It becomes kind of logical. You take pictures of nautical scenes, you might very well end up in a yachting magazine. Like it's just, they tend to go together one-to-one in terms of commercial clients and editorial clients, so that as you're converting from where you feel more like an amateur to someone who's more in a professional realm, oftentimes figuring out where you want to go is based on the audience. It's not just, I want to be in National Geographic because it's like a really famous magazine. Not a good approach. How do you email your work to people? So I used to make PDFs. I'd make a PDF on the recommendation of a graphic designer and a photographer who said, the great thing about a PDF is that when somebody opens it, you more or less control how they go through it because you've laid out the pages and the sequence that they see the work is based on how the PDF works. And that's what I used to do. It's really time consuming. And I had one editor say, that's annoying. Don't do that. And I thought, well, what should I do? And they said, just paste them into the body of an email. Like, I'm looking at these pictures on my phone. I want like 5 sentences at the top that tell me what I'm looking at, and I just want to look at the pictures. I don't want to open zip files. Don't send me a WeTransfer. Don't send me print grade pictures. Don't send me 80 photographs. Don't send me just a link. Don't send any additional step that they have to do something in order to get to your pictures. So now everything, it's great. It's nice and easy. You take the pictures, drag and drop. That's how big I put them. You could put 20 some odd photographs into a regular like Gmail email to somebody. And that's it. It's not much of a secret formula. It's just how I do it. And everyone, galleries, editors, curators, everyone that I send pictures to, they go in that format, unless they request something else. If someone says to you, this may happen, you're at an opening, someone says like, oh, your work sounds kind of cool, send it to me. That's it. You don't get any more instructions. They don't say send it to me in this format or like there's nothing extra. They just say send it to me. What do? I do this. If the conversation goes on a little longer, you can ask them, what would you like me to send you? How would you like it sent? And you'll start to find people in the professional world, they're all short on time. It's just quick. They are probably going to look at your pictures in a quick email in the morning, or they're going to flip through them on the phone. So the simpler you can do it, I find it's the better. I publish in magazines. So this is something that took me a long time to wrap my head around, and I realized only in hindsight I had a professor in university who told me about this, and it just never registered. It didn't listen. He was talking about fashion photography, and he said the reason that you want to be in a magazine like Vogue, for example, is not because Vogue pays really well. It's not a really good gig. It's that you would like to attract the attention of the people who advertise in Vogue because they will pay you 10 times the amount to do the work that the magazine will pay you. Editorial is getting your stuff in a magazine is good PR for yourself. It gets you out there. You can send it to people, say like, look, I was published here, here, and here. But it never pays well, at least as far as I've seen. You're not getting like 5-6-figure numbers, never come in for editorial. Maybe they did in the past. I've never seen it. I don't think I can think of anybody I know who would even say that. But if you're doing commercial work in the magazine, you want to shoot for Chanel in Vogue, that's going to pay really well. And that's one of the reasons why you'd like to get into the cycle of the world that you'd like to inhabit. Every magazine has photographs, right? Every magazine has advertisements. You'd like to fit so that the advertisements in the magazines might be companies that you'd be interested in working for. If not, you can have really great work in completely the wrong magazine, and the thing will never lead anywhere. It's not that you're not doing things, you're not making good pictures, it's just not fit well for the type of work you're trying to get. As you build up a few projects, something will inevitably happen. You will show the work to someone, and they will shrug their shoulders. They won't be into it. Not everyone is going to be into the work that you produce. And I would say out of 10 things that go out at this point, 2 come back positive. They've gotten more polite over the years. They'll say like, no, it's not a good fit, or we have something, but maybe it's later. But there are 2 different ways that you can think about making yourself unique, where like you can think about it without the framework of somebody else. I divide it into the categories of either your process is really interesting and it helps it stand out, or the story is really interesting. So 2 examples that are not mine, just 2 that have really impressed me. The first is an Irish photographer, Richard Moss. Ever since we had cameras to photograph conflict, we've been shooting war. And there are loads of journalists shooting various forms of people mutilating each other around the globe. He took an interesting approach. In 2009, he said that he learned that Kodak was going to stop creating their infrared film, and he was going to photograph a bit of the conflict in the eastern portion of the Congo. And I saw his pictures for the first time on a billboard advertisement in Venice for the Biennale. And I just remember seeing guys with machine guns in pink bushes. And I couldn't tell if I was into it or not, but at dinner I remembered it. I said to my girlfriend, like, I gotta find that show. That sounds kind of weird. I don't know if I like it or not, but like, it stuck with me. And what you're looking at is infrared film photographing conflict. There are loads of other pictures of guys walking around with AK-47s in the bush. But when you put these in a lineup with everything else, they all stand out because all the bushes are pink. Like, the process is different. The story is not terribly different. James Nachtwey spent an entire lifetime shooting work that's in this realm. He shoots it in a different way. But you put his work next to Moss's work, and you can tell which is one and which is the other. So it's a good way to help your project stand out if you have a process that makes the work distinct. The second one is the story. And I say the story because this is a picture by Jimmy Chin's the photographer. I've gotten to know Jimmy over the years. He's a really great guy. If you ever have a chance to hear him tell this story in its entirety about Alex Honnold, who's the guy standing on El Cap in Yosemite, it's great to hear. But the reason I put this in a story category rather than in the process category is that if you took Alex out, for example, there are a lot of pictures of Yosemite that kind of look like that. But you can't get away from the fact that what Alex did is, for anyone who doesn't know the story, he climbed El Cap with no ropes. So the first time they climbed El Cap, I think I heard it took 4 days. He did it in 4.5 hours with no ropes. I honestly cannot make sense of that. Just a sense. Just climbs it up. Jimmy's up there. Jimmy's like, I got ropes. You're kidding me. There's no way I'm doing that without ropes. But that's the way that Alex, so he took a break on the ledge, and you can see he has shoes, a chalk bag, and fingers. There's really nothing else. It's an amazing story, and it's an amazing picture because the story is mind-bending, and also because these guys know each other. Like, it comes out of a whole world where there's lots of climbing pictures, there is something unique, and lo and behold, Jimmy's done some work for National Geographic. They thought it was a good cover shot. I completely agree. Next thing we'll talk about is pricing work. And this could be a 1-week seminar on its own with 45 experts, none of which will come to a consensus on how this process happens. This was my approach. My naive approach was to work through 3 different phases of pricing. In the beginning, when you don't know how much you should really price your work for, I found it was helpful to think about it in terms of a multiple of production. So if it costs you $100 to print a picture, you're going to do times 4 as just a baseline, just to start, just to get you into a program of what it's going to cost. Every industry that sells stuff has some sort of markup between production, wholesale, and retail. Photo is not exactly like that, but there is enough commonality that you have the costs of production, plus your time and everything else that goes into it, to an end sale. So it gives you some level of consistency when you start so that you figure out what your end product is. So say you're doing a print for an exhibition, you figure out what the print costs, maybe what the framing costs, and it's a multiple. The other thing that you should do is quantify your time. This is something a lot of people who are starting out are really bad at doing. So here's an easy way to think about it. If you had to hire an assistant, you'd probably hire an assistant at around $15 an hour. If you put a thing on Craigslist, I need a photo assistant, $15 an hour, like will not sexually molest, you'll get a bunch of people who will call you back and want to work for you. It's like a pretty decent, okay starting rate. Now, if you're hiring them, you should be at least 3 times more valuable than them. So give yourself like $45, $50 an hour. Just to start. Just think about, like, that's where your pre-production, your scouting, your post-production, all that time comes together so that you can start backing into some real numbers. I am neither a English specialist or a mathematics specialist. So for that reason, I had to use really basic equations to get going. And eventually it worked. I was able to quantify my time on projects. For commercial projects, it worked. For gallery projects, it worked slightly differently. So I had to make a change when I got into that. When you get invited to shows, so somebody says, I want to put your work into a group show. All right, super, right? You're excited. The thing that you have to work out is you'd like to ask them, what's the price range in the show? So if the price range is from $5,000 to $50,000, you don't want to price it at $800 and you don't want to price it at $90,000. You want to be within the range of the person who's showing the work. It's up to you whether you want to be at the top end or the bottom end, but you don't really want to be the outlier. You don't want to be the cheapest thing in the show, and you don't want to be the most expensive thing in the show. And if you don't know, and it's at a place, you just ask them, what's the range? And you can ask them, for the last show you had, what was that range? Because really you're more interested in the stuff that actually sold. Someone could have come in and say you had a show that went from $500 to $10,000. And they say, like, well, we had like 5 people at work at like $8,000, $9,000. Yeah, but did it sell? If it didn't sell, it's a worthless touch point. It doesn't really matter. You want to know, like, in that space, who can that person sell? So it helps you price it based on the audience that you're going to be engaging, right? And you do this for a while until things sell consistently. And then you get to that nice point where someone says, I'd like to buy that. And you say, sorry, it's sold out. I don't have any left. You can buy the next one. And they say, okay, and that one tends to be more money. Usually there's a waiting list, and that's the position you'd like to get into. What I found as I had artist mentors who were all older than me, completely didn't get this about the exhibition world. Really good galleries. Most of the work that is on the walls, when it opens, they're sold out. The work you're seeing is to sell future work, not the work that's there. There may be tail ends of the edition that aren't sold, but really good galleries, they bring in their big collectors first. They get first pick. All that stuff gets purchased. And then the sales are going towards the next work. And I know some artists, they have 2-3 year wait lists. They have people who are like, I'll just buy anything. If the next thing that you produce, I will buy. I don't care what it is, I'll buy it. And this has happened over history. Monet was famous for this. He had work pre-sold before it was going out. People were like, I'll just give you 50,000 francs. 50,000 francs back in the 1800s. I mean, like, it was sold. So this is something that you'd like to get up to, because eventually what you will find is the highest echelons of the commercial photo world, the gallery photo world, they are based on the prices that people can command. That's it. How does somebody have an $80,000 day rate? Because somebody like Chanel really wants them, and that's the rate. So it's not really, it's in a lot of ways, it's not based on anything other than the market that they've developed for themselves. Do I need to print my work? While everyone here has phones in their hands, one of the differentiating factors that I've found is I sell more prints to people if I can put a print in their hand. I don't know what it is. It's the physical quality of it. They see something, they look at the print, it looks better than the screen. So if you're interested in having shows and selling work that way, I would say, yes, you have to print. You don't have to print your entire show. If you have 20 photographs, like, you don't have to print an edition of 6, 20, just print everything. It's too much of an expense up front. But you would like to, on the front end of things, if somebody says, I'd like to buy your picture, you'd like to have something to show them. For all the virtual things that have happened with the internet and social media and things where you can look at pictures virtually, there is something about making a print. And I think a portion of it is that people also want to know that, like, you've gone through the effort of doing this. They really want to see it. And sometimes you make a framed print or a mounted print, because I find it's easier for them to picture how it's going to look in their house if they can see it like framed and done up. So next question people ask me, do I print? No. Enough time in construction, I am done with chemicals. I have a guy who does the printing for me. This is not a plug for Eric. That's Eric Luden on the left. He is a savior to me. He does all of my printing. Digital Silver Imaging is his company. I don't get a cut from this. If you call him up and harass him and say, Adam sent you, great. It makes zero difference to me. I just wanted it to be an open book thing where you see, like, I use this guy to do my printing. He does my sample prints. He does my work prints. He does my exhibition prints, everything. And it's a relationship that, to me, is as important as you getting an accountant and a lawyer. Because you are in the photo world. Unless you're doing all of your own printing yourself, which is totally cool, some people are into it, you'd like to have a relationship with a printer where if someone sees your work, and God forbid they're like, I'd like to buy that, you're scrambling to get work produced. You'd like to have a printer in place who knows your printing preferences, knows what kind of paper you like, knows what your picture should look like, and that you can call up and say, like, I'd like to get this picture printed. And the picture gets printed, and he's up in Boston. He's not in New York. Eric comes to New York a bunch of times a year for Photo Expo and other work-related things. He comes down for exhibitions that people have that he's printed, but he's not here. I don't need to stand next to him in order to get these things done, but it is absolutely critical that if you intend to sell prints, that you get in the habit of printing so that you can get all of your production kinks out before somebody buys your work. You don't want, like, one print going to one place, looking one way, and another print going, like, different paper, different printing process, something like, you'd like some level of uniformity. How many people shoot film? Okay. Handful. I started on film. I did the two of them for a while. Now I just do digital. The thing that I found with film is you can shoot film, but in terms of getting your work out there, the weird thing is you're going to have to digitize it anyway. So just keep it in mind that, like, you're shooting large format, medium format, some particular process where film is integral to the work that you do. You can do it, but just make sure you get some version of it digitized enough that you can send it to somebody. If someone is interested in running it, in order for you to get an article in a magazine, they're not going to take prints anymore. So it's just something to consider, but doable. How many people enter competitions? How many people apply for grants? In the process.
Right now.
Okay. Usually you get more competitions than grants. Grants you have to write a lot for, which is usually the big deterrent. You click down the requirements and there's a bunch of essays. You have to get letters of reference. Seems like a huge hassle, which keeps most people from applying for them. The way that I think about them is I wouldn't devote more than 10% of your annual resources, meaning your time and effort, to competitions. Grants they take more time, but the payoff is bigger. There are a lot of competitions. You can win, like the Eastern Uzbeki portrait competition, silver medal. Nobody's heard of this. This doesn't make any difference to your photographic career. And there are so many photo competitions that have emerged in the last decade because running photo competitions is profitable. Winning photo competitions, not so much. When they say, like, we had 300,000 applicants from 65 million countries and we charged $35 an entry fee and the winner gets $10,000, you just do the math and realize that the photographers are not the ones winning on that equation. So this is not to say that there are not some photo competitions that are worth doing, but the way to tell whether they're worth doing is look at the winners and look at what they've done afterwards. Has there been some kind of quantum leap in their work or in their career based on the award that they won? Some people will tell you, they'll say, I won this competition, it introduced me to this person, this person, and this person, and that was a huge help to my growth. Other people you will see, like, you look at some of the humanitarian awards, you will see very big names in there, and you'll see people who you've never heard of, whose careers never really went anywhere. It's like the award didn't do that much. So try and keep 10%. Don't kill yourself applying to 30 competitions a year. Some people who just like the award thing, I'm not too into medals. I don't really care. Some people like the little pat on the back. You did a good job. Here's a gold star. You did it. Awesome. But I wouldn't expect it to do much for you in terms of forwarding your career and introducing you to judges and things. If it's a competition where you meet the judges, different story. That may be better because you'd like to meet curators, you'd like to meet editors, you'd like to meet gallerists. So if you're a finalist and you get to interview with them, super. This is a much better one to enter into. One you just drop online, not going to make so much of a difference. This is something that a lot of people struggle with. I struggled with it. I thought that describing my work sounded like either bragging or salesy. And it was something that I find a lot of people are really not comfortable with. So the type of work that I do, I'm a cultural photographer. My specialty is photographing craftsmen. A typical workshop that I photograph on the young end has been around for at least 5 generations. The oldest shop was 21 generations. That's what I do. I do other stuff, but that's basically what I do. Most of the time, if I am in a conversation with someone who says, what do you do? I tell them that. The next question is, where are you going to next? It does the job. It facilitates the conversation. They get an idea of what I'm doing. I don't qualify it. It's not good. It's great. I'm not doing this spectacular work that you have to check. It's like, this is just the work that I do. And you can decide if that's something that's interesting, conversation moves forward. If it's not, we talk about something else. But this way, you'd like to have some summary of what it is you do. And I think one of my hypersensitivities to it is I came out of art school where you're allowed to just bumble over words. You never really have to put into words what you do well. And if you do, counterintuitively, you're usually accused of being too much of a showman. It's like a good artist shouldn't really, their work, they should almost not know what they're doing. They can't put it into words. And there are parts of the artistic process that you can't articulate. Absolutely. But there are other things like what kind of photos do you take that you would like to be able to answer in 2 or 3 sentences in a way that is reasonably interesting. This is going to come up. If it hasn't for people who are getting into the professional world, you should do this. The exposure is going to be great, but there's no money. Being on a billboard in Times Square is not going to sell you any pictures unless you are set up to be hired in that format. A lot of the promises of exposure don't really equate to the things that you might need in sales. Sometimes the exposure is too big and it's too general. It doesn't relate at all. So what I found is if it's something that seems interesting, maybe I'll do it, but I'll just do it once. I'm not going to get in the habit if it's like, oh, it's good for exposure, it's good to be in this magazine, you'll get more stuff from this. Usually it's BS. It's usually someone they can get work for free, and they're trying to leverage getting work for free. That's really what it is. So if you would like to donate to their business cause, go right ahead. It's one thing you may have to, mess up yourself and see. Free work for NGOs, horrendous idea. Horrendous. This does not pay dividends. It does not lead to them hiring you again. I've gone down this route. I don't think that all of them are mean-spirited. I don't think that they're evil and conspiring against people. They just often haven't thought about a photographic budget, and they take free work if you're willing to give it to them. So that's my feeling on doing work for free. This one you're going to get. 10 years ago, we couldn't have had this conversation. How many people are on Instagram? Almost everybody? This is like the greatest direct email platform in the world. You used to have to scour cocktail parties and events to like get someone's contact. How do you contact somebody at a magazine? How do you contact someone at a gallery? Google will tell you. How do you DM on Instagram? How do you send a direct message to somebody on Instagram? It's so easy to just send your work to someone if you've done the homework first. You look at what they're doing, you look at your work, and you think like, this really is a fit. I've made something that is probably of interest to your magazine, your company, your gallery, something. You can contact them directly. People will often say like, well, could I like go into a gallery and like meet somebody? Probably not. Usually when a gallery is having an opening, they're attending to the people that they know first. So yeah, you might meet somebody there. It's possible. But it's going to take a lot of evenings out in New York before you actually do. And if you're not in a place that has photo events, it's going to be a little harder. I can't tell you how many stories I've got between like friends of mine who are like, oh yeah, like I sent these guys like a direct message on Instagram and they hired me. It's like, wow, really? Or people who like, they wrote to me and they said like, I really like that picture you bought. Are you doing prints of that? And it's like, it's just in that format. It's on Instagram. It's free. And this is coming from someone who went kicking and screaming onto Facebook and Instagram. I wasn't into the idea. I really resisted it. It was not something, some people will say like, oh, you're young, you're into it. One, I'm not that young. I finished university without a cell phone. So I'm not super tech forward. So it wasn't something that I was like, oh, I can't wait to get on like, this new Elo image service. Like, no, I wasn't into it. But I have found it connects people really well, and it's easy to use. So that of all the configurations, I find that having a place for your work to be seen is a help. You can find a different format, but it's not a bad place to start. And it also allows you a one-to-one interaction in a way that I don't think other ones like Facebook do. Twitter, I don't have enough stuff to say to be on there in text. They put pictures on there, still haven't looked at it. I could be missing the boat. Somebody in here says Twitter's spectacular for finding new jobs. Let me know, but I don't think it is. So far as they've come up with, Silicon Valley offered Instagram. It is the easiest way, I think, to do it. So this is a summary of all the mistakes that I've made. I've explained them in long form, but as I've gone through projects, I've had things where ideas were underdeveloped, right? Let the foundation say make a documentary. Bad idea. Unknown market conditions. I didn't look and see who else was doing similar work. Who else is making work in some way that's even like remotely connected, either to the subject matter, to the location, anything. Just get a sense of where it is, who's doing it. You don't want to make the same project someone else is currently working on. And if you do, you'd like yours to be distinctly different. Poor planning, so that there isn't really much of a structure. I did the no structure thing, like we'll just see how it goes. Some people do the we'll see how it goes, and it goes really well. It doesn't work for me. So whichever camp you fall into, just find a strategy that works. I find planning helps me a bit. Lack of confidence. Going into certain projects, it's going to be the first time that you're shooting something. Like, I remember the first time I shot automobiles. I was like, I've never really shot cars. I don't know. And there's like, that lack of confidence is something that you have to get used to wrestling with and getting through, so that you're going to do a bunch of stuff you've never done before. That's part of being a photographer. It's also really exciting. It's an interesting part of the process to get into. Comprehensive pricing. Like I said, like, you're not pricing just the print. It took you some time to get up to it, and from the point at which you produced it, there was other work that you had to do. It's like looking at a broader spectrum of the work that you do. In order to come up with pricing, start by just putting it down on a sheet of paper so that you can figure out how much effort you're putting into the work that you're doing. The work that's not unique, this is something you have to put to yourself. And if you don't have any perspective on yourself, get yourself in a critique class. Get yourself in a portfolio review. Sign up for something so that you can have outside input. If you don't know where to go for it, pay someone. Portfolio reviews often, like, you pay money and you get to sit in front of editors who otherwise might not bother with you. You might not just be able to email them, like you can't DM them on Instagram. They won't give you the time of day. But if you pay them, you can sit down and sit with 10 editors like in a day. And that may be useful because it will give you some perspective on whether your stuff is unique. If they all look at it and say, I've seen pictures of these mountains before, you know you've got to take a different approach. Projects that are incomplete, like I'd make something, start, and then it wouldn't finish, and I never got to the end portion. This is a big thing where you get really excited at the beginning and lose all your momentum at the end. You want to be able to finish it to a format that you can show someone. Even if it's not 100% complete, you'd like at least, I see this in its worst form, is someone sends you a bunch of pictures, half of them in black and white, half of them in color. I'm like, you're not done. Go back, finish your work, and when you select the ones that you actually want me to look at, bring me those. I don't want to look at the mix and match between them. The other one is open-ended timelines. 4 things for long-term projects, and even short-term projects, you'd like to give yourself a timeline. Otherwise, they can go on for much longer than you had anticipated. So these are all things that I can tell you, I've done all of them. I've done all of them multiple times. I'm doing my very best to stop doing all of them. And at this point, I don't really struggle with these anymore. But I had to go through making all of these mistakes first. So we're going to pause there. I think we're actually right on the hour. For anybody who has to step out, there were some people who submitted questions in advance. So these are questions from people inside the B&H portfolio community that I just wanted to answer, and then we'll do live questions. So is anybody going to step out? We're good? Cool? All right. So the first question, when you decide to do a photo project, should I define the process, lens, focal distance, distance, proximity from the subject, or can I change what I like for the most specific subject? A project should have unity and variety. In whatever format, you get that in there. So the pictures should all look unified, like they came from one photographer. It shouldn't look like you're looking at 5 different photographers. And there should be variety, so that you don't want to have 3 of basically the same photograph. You'd like there to be a balance and a range between the 2. You can change all of these. You can change the process, you can change the lens, the focal distance. These are all technical concerns that no one is ever going to ask for the answer. They're not going to care. I've never heard a project where they're like, it's used a 75 millimeter lens for that whole project. That was really amazing. Nobody cares. This is not important. And this is not to say that that's what that question was, but it's like the technical things that you will use to get your project off the ground are secondary to the idea. Could you explain with an example the phases of a project? This is going to vary for people, but generally speaking, for me, I have the ideation phase where you're thinking about it, some sort of pre-production and scouting where you're looking at the logistics of actually making the work, getting to the place that you're going to be shooting the work, all of this stuff on the front end before you actually pick up the camera. Then you're going to have the execution of the work, so actually shooting and doing the post. And then the end result is going to be the production where the work is going to go. So what is its final output? When it's done, is it going to be in what? Magazine, exhibition? You're just going to put it online. Maybe it's for your website development. Maybe you need it. You're going to make some sort of portfolio to show to a prospective client. Maybe you're going after a certain type of work and you're trying to put together a body of images. Whatever it is, those are going to be the major divisions that I use. Anything beyond that, if it's helpful to break it down further, by all means, break it down. Find a system that works for you. That's just what I've come up with so far. Question 3, so I think, what is the difference between a series and collection of photos in the same subject, theme, and sequence? I think what's being asked here is, what's the difference between just a collection of photos that are thematically linked and what actually constitutes a project? If I misunderstood that question, is there, so you can do a series on rocks. Thematically, rocks links the entire thing. It's not necessarily an interesting project, but it is they're linked. There is some form of unity to the whole thing. So you can have collections. You will see online very frequently collections in genres. So you go to websites and people say, like, here's my landscapes, here's my cityscapes, here's my nudes, here's my street photo. These aren't projects. These are collections that fit into a theme. Now, you can take those and develop them into a project, but usually the thing that they're missing is an idea from the photographer. Because the genre of landscape or nude was not created by anyone in this room. We didn't create that. That pre-existed us. But your project on a landscape is going to have some idea embedded in it that is based on you specifically. And that, to me, is the difference between a collection and a project. Can I use different types of photos and treatments, black and white, color, solarized, infrared, mixed media for the same project? And if yes, how can I make the transition? The short answer with this is, in the beginning, just don't do it. It's overly complicated. It's like cooking. Like, learn how to cook one dish well. Don't do like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert all in one thing. It's just going to be harder. Trying to get that balance between some level of unity and some level of variety. When you put mixed media in a body of work, in a collection of pictures, it often reads as confusion. It just looks like people look at it and they do that. They kind of do like the dog thing, like they don't really get what they're looking at. You don't want to confuse an audience. That's really not a great way to engage them. You'd like to give them something that's clear. The easiest place I can think of off the top of my head to look at this, have a look at the Hasselblad Masters winners. Usually, these pictures are so freakishly cohesive that they're dead boring, but God, are they cohesive. The aesthetic of them is just so pared down. They are so sharp. They are just so that. It's not my thing, but as an example of a collection of pictures that are unified, when you look at the thumbnail galleries of the winners, they're all over the place. But when you open up one gallery, they are like bang on unified. And this is what you'd like to be able to do, is you'd like to be able to do something simple and clear first. And as you move from project to project, those are your natural breaks. So you could have a black and white project, you could have a color project, you could have a diptych project, you could have a color reversal project, but just don't put them all together in one.
What was the name of that again?
The Hasselblad Masters. The galleries, the annual galleries are kept up each year, so you can look at the previous years too. I think they keep them up the entire time. So how do you find someone at a gallery, magazine, et cetera, interested to show, print your photographs? So I think this is a really interesting question, because embedded in this is an assumption that a lot of people have that I think is a mistaken assumption. There is no one hiding in a gallery who's secretly interested in your work and just hasn't seen it yet. It doesn't really exist. They might become interested in it. This one you can think, this is a little bit more like dating. You know, your prospective mate may be out there. They're probably not currently interested in you if they've never met you. You'd like to start meeting a few people, getting a sense for your preferences, and things build naturally from there. But there isn't somebody hiding, waiting for it. So I think the better question is, who is your audience? Based on what you're making pictures of, who's into it? You know, like an architectural photographer, probably going to sell to an architect, because architects need pictures of their work. So from just like a strictly commercial standpoint, that's a good pairing. Someone who shows architectural photographs at exhibition, you can go to a gallery and say like, okay, they show architectural pictures. That seems to be like in line with what I'm doing. You know, say you take pictures of vintage cars, go to someone who's a vintage car dealer or a vintage car collector. Like, these are going to be better pairings. And there are, at this point, websites and magazines devoted to every interest. So all you have to do is figure out, what are you really shooting? and where's it going to go. The area that has the least amount of commercial, I'd say, output right now, the area where you're going to make the least amount of money but there's the greatest amount of interest, is street photography. Street photography, as far as I can tell, there are a lot of people interested in it. It sells terribly. It's why you don't see it at a lot of galleries. It's not in a lot of magazines other than street photography, usually oriented websites, not even magazines. So sometimes you may have something that's wildly popular, not commercially successful. So if you're looking to make money on it, it may not be the best route to go down. So you just like to kind of look and say, like, who's my audience and do they have any interest in spending money on the work that I'm making? The last one, before we open it up to your questions here, is how can you translate your work from volunteering to profit? Easy. Never volunteer. Stop giving away work for free. This is a terrible idea. You know, like if you are in a position where you can intern for free and it really doesn't matter, go ahead and do that. But if you work for someone for free, why on earth would they ever pay you? You've established a precedent of I will do this stuff for nothing, so why would they go to somebody else? The biggest problem I see in the photo world is the bottom end of the sort of commercial market. Everyone cannibalizes themselves. They're willing to do it for less and less and less and less. Stop doing this. Just stop. Put a price on it, and when people say to you, like, well, I found so-and-so, will do it cheaper. And I think you'll always find someone who's cheaper. That's a guarantee. But they shouldn't be buying cheap. They should be buying your work based on some level of quality. And you have to be able to stand behind that and say, like, you know what? You can get it for less. Absolutely. The pictures, they're probably going to be not as good. And I've had people who I've walked away from jobs for, they say, like, oh, I have a budget, it's like a few $100s. I say, like, okay, here's what I would charge. You go back, have a meeting with your team, see how much money you guys have, come back and let me know what a number is. And sometimes they come back with a number that's too low. I say, all right, fine, I'm not doing it. Or they come back and miraculously they came up with more money that was hiding somewhere. So I don't really know where the secret coffers are, but I know that they do exist. So, you know, the volunteering thing, the profit thing, if it relates specifically to NGOs and humanitarian outfits, the really good ones, they have photo budgets. They have like legit photo budgets. They know, like any business knows, that in order for them to demonstrate what they're doing, they need photographs. And the better photographs that they're going to get are going to cost them money. So if they haven't budgeted for it yet, and they say, like, we don't really have a budget for photography, it's easy. You just say, no problem. Go think about it. Go think about your budget, and when you come back, it's fine. I know people in all other fields of production. Website is a really prevalent one that I've seen, where people will say, like, we need a new website for this launch we're doing. What's your budget? We don't really have a budget. And, like, you know, the guy who I use for my websites, we have a good relationship, and he'll say, like, this is what it's going to cost. This is what it should cost, and this is what it's going to cost in the market. So you'll get numbers here and there, and then they can make the decision.